Welcome to Anatomy of the Extraordinary, the podcast that unveils true, remarkable stories from the edges of human experience. I'm your host, and today we dive into another extraordinary journey.
December 9, 1976. I want you to put yourself in this exact scenario. It is the middle of the night, and you are sitting in the pitch-black cockpit of a heavy twin-engine aircraft.
Okay, setting the scene. I'm there.
You cannot see the nose of the plane in front of you. You can't see the horizon. Outside the reinforced glass, there's nothing but the blinding, chaotic swirl of a severe winter snowstorm.
Sarah's absolutely terrifying.
It is, and the noise is deafening. You're sitting right behind two massive radial engines, and they're just roaring, vibrating right through the floorboards. You're pushing 1,500 gallons of highly volatile aviation fuel through the dark, and you are flying what pilots call on the deck.
Right, like Nate of the Earth.
Exactly. Dangerously low. And you were doing this on purpose. You were skimming the jagged, unforgiving granite peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains in total zero visibility conditions.
Hold on, we need to stop right there and unpack the mechanics of what you're describing, because that is borderline suicidal. If you are flying Nape of the Earth in a blizzard, you are actively overriding every single aviation safety protocol that exists. I mean, let's explain what that term actually means for a second.
Yeah, good.
Nape of the Earth doesn't just mean flying low. It means you are using the geographical contours of the Earth, like the valleys, the saddles between mountains, to physically mask your aircraft from radar line of sight.
Right.
Radar works by sending out electromagnetic waves, right? So if a solid granite mountain is between you and the radar dish, the wave can't bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
But doing that at night in a severe snowstorm over some of the most treacherous alpine terrain in North America,
That is saying.
it requires a very specific type of machine and, honestly, a profound level of desperation. So what exactly are we flying here?
Well, that is the defining question, right?
Yeah.
For decades, the local mythology in the mountains claimed this plane was just a standard Beechcraft or, maybe a Lockheed PV-1 Ventura, which was a vintage World War II light bomber. But the historical records eventually cleared up those contradictions.
Yeah.
You were actually sitting in a Howard 500.
A Howard 500. Wow. Okay, that changes the entire physics of this flight.
Yeah, it does.
Because the Howard 500 is this fascinating piece of engineering. It was built in the 1960s as a high-speed executive transport, but it was constructed using the structural frame and the wing design of that older vintage Ventura bomber.
Military bones.
Exactly. So it has the heavily reinforced bones of a military warbird, but it's engineered and pressurized for long-range corporate travel. It's fast, it's incredibly heavy, and frankly, it looks like a Russian bear bomber.
And right now, that heavy metal warbird is completely lost in the storm. And you are not ferrying corporate executives.
Right, let me guess.
You are hauling contraband. And suddenly, through the blinding, hypnotic strobe of the snow, the tops of tall, ancient conifers just appear directly in the windshield.
Oh.
There is zero time to pull back on the yoke. The violent impact is instantaneous. The massive plane clips the trees, and the left wing instantly shears off, tearing the hydraulic lines wide open.
Just shredded.
Right. The tail assembly rips away in the branches. The main fuselage, which is now completely stripped of its aerodynamics, becomes this heavy metal projectile. It cartwheels through the freezing air and slams nose first directly through the thick winter ice of Lower Merced Pass Lake at an elevation of 8,000 feet.
8,000 feet up. That's high backcountry.
Exactly. The heavy cabin immediately sinks into the freezing, murky black water.
Yeah.
And then absolute silence falls over the backcountry as the snow continues to blanket the wreckage.
That is a chilling, brutal end to a flight. But from an investigative standpoint, a heavy aircraft crashing into a high-altitude alpine lake in a national park should be the definition of a closed crime scene.
Right, you'd think so.
I mean, it is isolated, it's frozen, and it is entirely hidden from the outside world.
It really should have been a closed scene.
Yeah.
And exploring why it wasn't is the entire mission of our deep dive today.
I can't wait.
We're pulling together historical flight logs, first-hand accounts from rock climbers, federal enforcement records, and investigative journalism to understand an event that just defies logic.
Because it's such a bizarre collision of worlds.
Completely. We are looking at how the wreckage of this specific plane, which was carrying 6,000 pounds of premium Mexican marijuana, sparked a bizarre, anarchic backcountry gold rush.
6,000 pounds?
Yeah. We're going to explore how this single frozen crime scene permanently militarized national park rangers and simultaneously inadvertently funded the professionalization of American rock climbing.
The paradox of that premise is just staggering to me. You have federal authorities and starving countercultural rock climbers converging on a frozen lake, effectively fighting over the spoils of a cartel smuggling run.
It's wild. But to understand how we get to that frozen lake, we have to rewind the tape just a few days and move a few hundred miles southeast to Las Vegas, Nevada.
Okay, setting the stage.
This is where the setup happens. The pilot of this Howard 500 is John Scott Glisky. He's 31 years old, a Vietnam veteran from Seattle. He is a guy who looks the part of a rugged aviator, 6'2", strong jawline.
Central casting for a smuggler pilot?
Right. His passenger and colleague for this run is a 29-year-old named Jeff Nelson. But as they sit in Las Vegas waiting to make this run, Glisky is not projecting that confident swagger of a veteran smuggler. He is consumed by severe paranoia.
Which, that psychological state is a crucial mechanism to understand here. In the world of illicit logistics, the waiting period, that liminal space between runs, is where the mental fatigue really sets in.
Because there's nothing to do but think.
Exactly. You're alone in a hotel room, you are fully aware of the catastrophic risks you are about to take, and you have entirely too much downtime to analyze every single variable that could go wrong. It is a pressure cooker for the human mind.
And Glisky's mind is redlining at this point. He is convinced something is going to go fatally wrong on this specific trip. He actually goes to a local post office and mails a package to his 6-year-old daughter.
Oh, wow. What was it?
A toy tea set. It feels like a final gesture, Then he picks up the hotel phone and calls his wife, Pam. Pam is 28, and she's currently recovering from surgery on the nerves in both of her feet.
So she's immobilized.
Yeah, she is literally hobbling around their home. She's slow to answer the phone, and he ribs her a little, says, "What took you so long?" But beneath that banter, he expresses these incredibly dark premonitions. He tells her he feels that this flight is cursed.
But did he have a specific actionable reason to believe he was in danger? Or was this just the generalized paranoia of a man who's been chased by federal agents for years? Because the sources explicitly note that Glisky was essentially a ghost to the DEA.
Right, he was very elusive.
He would pop up on their radar and vanish the next minute.
Well, he did have a very tangible, mechanical reason to be paranoid. During his pre-flight inspection of the Howard 500, he discovered a damaged oil fitting on the left engine.
Okay. That's a red flag.
Yeah, and he didn't just look at it and think it was routine wear and tear. He looked at the damage and suspected deliberate sabotage. He actually believed someone had actively tampered with his engines before the run.
I need to push back on the logic of that decision-making process right there.
Sure.
Think about this. If he is a highly experienced combat veteran who knows the absolute unforgiving nature of aviation, especially the temperamental nature of massive radial engines, and he finds an oil fitting that he suspects is intentional sabotage, why on earth does he still get in the cockpit?
It's a great question.
That violates every foundational instinct of human survival.
It does. But that brings us to the ultimate question of the smuggler's psychology. Later that night, to blow off steam, he goes to a high-end steakhouse in Vegas and randomly bumps into an old army buddy.
Just out of nowhere.
Yeah, totally random. They stay up late, drinking very expensive scotch, reminiscing about flying helicopters under fire in Vietnam, talking about stealing a Jeep in Quang Tri. He is laughing, putting away glasses of whiskey, projecting this easygoing, bulletproof exterior.
Masking the fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the pressure he's under is immense. Glisky works for a Washington-based smuggling crew known as Moda Magic, and the syndicate's inertia is a physical force.
Once the wheels are in motion, you can't stop them.
Right. There is a ground crew already waiting in Mexico. There are buyers eagerly waiting in the States. The gears of the criminal enterprise are turning, and they push him into that cockpit, completely overriding his survival instincts.
The infrastructure of an operation like Moda Magic relies entirely on pilots who are willing to ignore their own intuition to hit a deadline. The syndicate demands absolute compliance. So he suppresses his mechanical concerns, he pushes down the paranoia, and he taxes that heavy twin-engine beast down the runway at McCarran Airport.
That's exactly it. He and Nelson take off and head south, crossing the border into Baja California, Mexico. They land on a highly marginal, clandestine dirt airstrip.
Which is terrifying in its own right.
Imagine the immense tension of landing a massive, heavy plane like a Howard 500 on an unlit dirt strip in the pitch black. Once they are on the ground, a local crew swarms the plane and begins loading the cargo.
And this is a massive payload.
The scale of this product is enormous. We're talking 6,000 pounds of premium Mexican red hair marijuana.
Let's contextualize what that cargo actually means in 1976, because this isn't generic street-level product. Mexican red hair was a highly sought-after strain of sinsemilla.
Can you break down what sinsemilla is for the listener?
Yeah, for those unfamiliar with the botany, sinsemilla refers to seedless, unpollinated female cannabis plants. By preventing pollination, the plant redirects all its energy from producing seeds into producing sticky, resinous flowers.
Which drastically increases the potency, right?
Drastically. It increases the psychoactive potency immensely. In the mid-1970s, before modern indoor hydroponics became common, this was the absolute apex of the black market. But logistically, loading 3 tons of material into an executive transport aircraft is a massive physical undertaking. How did they package it to maximize the fuselage space?
So they packed it tightly into compressed 40-pound burlap bales. And they were highly strategic about it. The bales were deceptively stenciled with the word friol, the Spanish word for beam.
A visual countermeasure.
Exactly. Designed to throw off any casual inspection if they were to be momentarily stopped or observed on a tarmac. They stuffed the fuselage with these bales until the plane is practically bursting at the seams.
So now consider the aerodynamics of this situation. You have an already heavy aircraft, now loaded with 3 tons of deadweight, aerodynamically sluggish, operating at or perhaps even beyond its maximum gross takeoff.
It's lumbering.
And they have to lift this thing off a dirt strip in Mexico before dawn.
It's a terrifying physical feat, but they manage it. Before the sun comes up on December 9, they are airborne. They cross back into U.S. airspace and fly up the coast of California.
Which is a very specific choice.
Yeah, this flight path is a deliberate evasion tactic. A large twin-engine plane flying steadily along the coast looks completely innocuous to radar operators. It just registers as corporate hotshots being ferried to San Francisco or Seattle.
Just routine traffic.
Right. But halfway up the state, Glisky executes his critical evasion maneuver. He kills all the exterior running lights on the plane, banks sharply inland over the Central Valley, and drops his altitude dramatically to slip beneath the radar sweeps of the FAA and the military.
Which is incredibly risky given the geopolitical context of the era. It's 1976. The Cold War is very much active.
Yeah, tensions are high.
The Reno airport houses the Nevada Air National Guard. You have a massive plane moving at 350 miles per hour, without lights, looking distinctly like a Russian bomber trying to sneak through domestic American airspace.
Hitting the deck really is the only way to avoid scrambling military interceptors.
But choosing to do that in a severe winter storm over the granite spires of the Sierra Nevada is practically signing your own death warrant.
It is. They cut across the sparsely populated farmland of the Central Valley Basin in mere minutes. The moon is gibbous, so it's casting this eerie, luminous glow through the thick clouds. The plane is hugging the rocky alpine slopes, gliding up the Continental Rise.
Right into the danger zone.
And then, whether it was a catastrophic failure of that damaged left engine oil fitting, causing loss of propeller control, or simply a fatal misjudgment of altitude in the blinding snow, they clip the trees.
And it's over.
The flight of the Howard 500 violently ends in the freezing water of Lower Merced Pass Lake.
Which leaves a 3-ton cache of high-grade narcotics sitting completely undetected at the bottom of a lake in the middle of a national park.
And it remains a ghost for more than 6 weeks. The lake freezes over solidly, completely entombing the plane, the cargo, and the bodies of Glisky and Nelson.
It's waiting in the ice.
Exactly. So we jump forward in time to January 25, 1977.
This is where the environmental conditions play a fascinating, highly improbable role. Under normal meteorological circumstances, the Sierra Nevada high country in January would be buried under 10 to 15 feet of snow.
You wouldn't be able to get anywhere near it.
The terrain would be utterly impassable and visually uniform, just a sea of white.
But 1977 is a massive meteorological anomaly. It is the second year of California's worst drought in a century. The snowfall is incredibly light.
Right, so the backcountry is much more exposed and accessible than usual.
Because of this, 2 young guys, Ron Likens, who works as a waiter at Yosemite's incredibly posh Alwani Hotel, and his buddy, they finish their shifts and decide to go snowshoeing.
Just a casual hike.
Yeah, they drive up, park where the snowplows basically gave up clearing the road, and head straight out into the wilderness, pushing 8 miles into the backcountry. They actually lose the established trail markers, those little diamond blazes branded into the tree bark.
So they're wandering.
They are wandering slightly lost through a gently sloping bowl when lichens see something completely surreal.
Paint that picture for us. What exactly does a hiker see that tips this off?
Suspended high off the ground, wedged perfectly between two massive snow-draped conifers, is a severed airplane wing.
Oh my God.
It looks like a bizarre metallic bridge spanning the trees. As Lycan snowshoes closer, he realizes hydraulic oil is still actively dripping from the frayed, torn lines. It's staining the pristine white snow underneath with this toxic rainbow sheen.
That is such a vivid image.
But here is the bizarre part. There is no other debris around. It looks as though an airplane simply dropped a wing from the sky and vanished.
Right, let's explain the physics of that debris field for the listener. Because the main fuselage was stripped of its wing, it basically became a ballistic object.
It just kept going.
It cartwheeled nearly 3/4 of a mile away from that initial impact point before punching through the ice, so the wreckage is entirely separated.
It's a huge area.
Likens just happens to stumble upon the one isolated piece of the aircraft that didn't end up swallowed by the lake.
And because the sun is going down and it's getting dangerously cold, they don't push further to investigate the lake. They just hike out and report the severed wing to the park rangers.
Which is the responsible thing to do.
Likens strolls into the ranger station and tells them exactly what he found. And this report lands squarely on the desk of Tim Setnica.
Setnica is a legend.
He is. Setnica is the head of Yosemite Search and Rescue, famously known as YOSAR. He is part of this new, younger generation of park rangers. These guys aren't just giving polite nature tours to tourists, you know.
Right, they're hardcore.
They're highly trained in advanced law enforcement, scuba diving, and technical rock climbing. They informally call themselves the Danger Rangers.
Setnica must have immediately realized the darker implications of this report. An unreported twin-engine plane crash deep in the backcountry doesn't just signify a tragic aviation accident.
No, not in the 70s.
In the 1970s, an unreported heavy aircraft almost always meant illicit cargo.
Setnica picks up the phone and calls the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center to see if anyone has reported a plane missing. He reads them the tail number that the waiter managed to write down from the severed wing. And that single phone call sets off an absolute jurisdictional explosion.
Oh, I bet.
Within hours, you have 5 different federal agencies fighting tooth and nail over access to this frozen lake.
The bureaucratic gridlock of a situation like this is fascinating.
It's a nightmare.
You have the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA, who demand access to the aircraft to investigate the mechanical causes of the aviation disaster.
Naturally.
You have the DEA and U.S. Customs, who want the cargo and the flight logs because they are actively hunting international smuggling syndicates. And then you have the National Park Service, which claims ultimate territorial jurisdiction because the crash site is on their protected land.
Everyone wants a piece of it.
How does a multi-agency federal task force actually execute a recovery operation on a frozen crime scene at 8,000 feet in the dead of winter?
With brute force and heavy Vietnam-era military hardware.
Of course.
The U.S. Customs Service scrambles a massive Huey helicopter from San Diego. Imagine the sheer volume of sound as this military chopper echoes off the granite walls of Yosemite Valley.
That must have turned every head in Camp 4.
Oh, they definitely noticed. It lands in El Capitan Meadow to load up heavily armed customs agents and a regimental park ranger named Lee Shackleton. They fly up into the backcountry. From the air, looking down, they can finally see the complete picture.
The whole debris field.
The debris trail points like an arrow straight to the frozen surface of Lower Merced Pass Lake. They land the chopper directly on the ice, and they are met with a scene of total desolation.
What's left of the plane?
Well, a few of the burlap bales are actually sticking out of the ice like decaying frozen stumps. Some of the bales had ripped open upon impact, leaving a chunky green vegetal trail frozen directly into the surface of the lake.
But seeing the evidence and recovering it are two vastly different things. The sheer physical labor required to extract deeply frozen objects from an alpine lake is immense. They can't just bend down and pick this stuff up.
No, they cannot. Ranger Shackleton orders his men to get to work. They fire up gas-powered chainsaws and literally start cutting through 16 inches of solid, opaque ice to extract these bales. Setnica later described this as the absolute drudgery of recovery.
Think about the physics of using a chainsaw on frozen burlap for a second.
It sounds terrible.
A chainsaw is designed to cleanly eject wood chips. When you cut into tightly woven burlap that is frozen solid in ice, the fabric fibers instantly pull into the sprocket and the chain. The blades dull almost immediately, the water splashes up and freezes onto the guide bar. It is an incredibly inefficient and frustrating way to cut through material.
It is brutal, exhausting work. The bales they do manage to pry out are incredibly heavy, broken apart, and soaking wet. But despite the conditions, they manage to chop out roughly 2,000 pounds of marijuana.
Which leads to a massive logistical problem. Where exactly do you securely store 2,000 pounds of thawing, fuel-soaked federal evidence in the middle of a pristine national park?
It becomes an absolute nightmare. They fly the frozen bales back down to Yosemite Valley. The park's jail is located on the second floor of this battleship gray building, situated right above the park's firehouse.
Above the firehouse, that's going to be an issue.
They decide to close down one entire side of the jail and stack these frozen bales inside a holding cell. Initially, they treat them like giant inert ice cubes. But of course, the ambient temperature in the jail is warm, and they begin to thaw.
The biological reality of this is repulsive. You have thousands of pounds of plant matter that has been submerged in untreated lake water and highly toxic aviation fuel for weeks. As it thaws, anaerobic bacteria are going to go to work. It is going to become incredibly foul.
It is deeply visceral. The solid bales turn into a rotting, highly aromatic, runny slurry. Imagine taking a massive frozen package of spinach out of your freezer and leaving it on the kitchen counter for a week, but multiply that by a literal ton and soak it in gasoline.
That is stomach-turning.
The runoff chokes the drains in the jail cell. The stems and the decomposing plant matter completely clog the plumbing pipes. The dark liquid seeps through the floorboards and actually begins dripping directly onto the dispatch desk of the fire chief, Don Cross, on the floor immediately below.
The visual image of liquefying federal evidence dripping onto a fire chief's desk perfectly encapsulates the sheer, unprecedented chaos of this recovery operation.
Fire Chief Cross storms up the stairs, absolutely furious, and screams, "You gotta do something with this stuff." The exhausted Rangers are forced to don gloves, haul this putrid, dripping mess out of the jail, and relocate it to a walk-in freezer in a nearby Park Service maintenance warehouse.
But wait, they only extracted 2,000 pounds? They still have 4,000 pounds of illicit cargo, plus the heavy fuselage and the bodies sitting at the bottom of the lake. Do they bring in heavy salvage machinery at this point?
They try a different approach first. They bring in a commercial diver from Fresno to attempt to penetrate the gnarled underwater wreckage around the cockpit. But the diver quickly determines it is a suicide mission.
Why? Too tangled.
Yeah, the water is pitch black. The wreckage is a labyrinth of razor-sharp, torn aluminum, and the control cables act like suspended wire booby traps. Furthermore, the visibility is absolute zero because the water is saturated with leaked hydraulic fluids.
This sounds impossible.
And then Ranger Shackleton gets an urgent meteorological update. A massive, full-blown winter storm is rolling in over the mountains.
So they have to make a call.
The multi-agency task force realizes a winter salvage operation is not just costly, it is deadly. So they make a highly fateful decision. They abandon the site.
They just walk away.
They deem it too dangerous, pull all their personnel out on the Huey helicopter, and decide to leave the crime scene completely unguarded until the spring thaw.
I cannot emphasize enough how pivotal that decision is to the entire narrative. They leave 4,000 pounds of premium narcotics completely unattended in a park that is populated by incredibly resourceful, deeply impoverished individuals who spend their entire lives navigating difficult, vertical terrain.
The federal authorities assume the secret is perfectly safe, entombed under the ice. But thousands of miles away, the mist of the crash is already sparking into life.
Even without an official report.
Yes, because Pam Glisky, John's wife, has a haunting, terrifying dream. She sees John hanging upside down in his submerged cockpit.
Oh, wow.
She vividly dreams of his brown hair dancing weightlessly in the water, his massive frame suspended in the 5-point harness. DEA hasn't told her a single thing about the crash, so she uses her own resources.
What does she do?
She charters a small plane and frantically searches dirt airstrips in Baja, hobbling around on her heavily bandaged feet, asking shady local characters if they've seen her husband.
Her intuition is incredibly sharp, but geographically, she is looking in the wrong country. If the feds abandon the site in secret, how does the exact location of the crash actually leak to the general public?
The leak comes from John's lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Steinborn. Steinborn is a highly compelling character. He actually used to be Pam's lover years ago.
Oh, interesting dynamic.
He openly admits he thinks John is a prick, but he deeply cares about Pam's well-being. After weeks of agonizing silence, a federal agent slips up during a conversation and vaguely tells Pam that a plane was found somewhere in Yosemite.
That's all he needed.
She immediately calls Steinborn. He flies down from Seattle, rents a cheap hotel room just outside the park boundaries, and spends 3 days systematically eavesdropping in local bars.
Classic private eye stuff.
He overhears an indiscreet DEA pilot talking about the ongoing investigation, and Steinborn pieces together the exact location. He deduces that the fuselage, the bodies, and the vast majority of the weed are still sitting up there under the ice.
He essentially conducts his own private counterintelligence operation in the local watering holes. But once he has the coordinates, does he take this information back to the authorities?
No, he doesn't. And this is where the story pivots into folklore. On his last night in the valley, Steinborn walks over to a local campground. He sees a campfire burning, lights up a tie stick, and wanders over to a group of young, scruffy campers.
He's going to tell them.
He passes the joint around the fire and casually tells them a completely fantastic, almost mythical story about a downed airplane full of dope sitting unguarded in the high country. Steinborn later said in interviews that he had this romantic anti-establishment notion that someone should smoke that beautiful weed his client had died trying to bring back.
He intentionally seeds a highly lucrative rumor into the absolute heart of the counterculture.
And that rumor lands like a lit match in dry brush when it reaches Camp 4. To truly understand why what happens next was inevitable, we have to deeply analyze the climbing counterculture of Camp 4 in 1977.
The golden era of Yosemite climbing.
This is the era of the Stone Masters. We are talking about legends like Jim Bridwell, John Batchar, John Long, Dale Bard, and Vern Clevenger. These guys are the absolute elite of big wall climbing. They are bagging first ascents on El Capitan, pushing the limits of human endurance and grip strength.
That economically?
Their reality is bleak. They are living in extreme, desperate poverty.
It is vital to clarify that dirtbag climbers wasn't just a trendy aesthetic in the 1970s. It was a harsh economic reality. There were no corporate sponsorships, no energy drink endorsements.
Nothing like that.
They are living illegally in tents, wearing ragged clothes, and completely dedicating their entire physical existence to the rock face at the absolute expense of any traditional income.
When you say desperate, you mean they are literally diving into the dumpsters behind the Yosemite Lodge cafeteria to scavenge half-eaten tourist sandwiches.
That's how they survived.
If a family of tourists gets up from a picnic table and leaves a quarter of a hamburger on their plate, these elite world-class athletes rush over to finish it off just to get enough calories to climb the next day. They have zero money for food, let alone the specialized expensive gear required for big wall climbing.
So they are primed for this.
And then, the wild rumor from the lawyer is suddenly confirmed by a secondary leak. A ranger's girlfriend overhears radio traffic detailing the exact coordinates of the crash site, and the whisper races through Camp 4. There is a multi-million-dollar fortune in marijuana sitting unguarded at Lower Merced Pass Lake.
You have a localized population of highly athletic, risk-tolerant individuals who view federal regulations as mere suggestions, and you present them with an unguarded treasure chest 16 miles away in terrain they navigate for fun. The math is inevitable.
It sparks an instant frantic gold rush. The Stone Masters, along with the young, impressionable climbers who worship them, mobilize immediately. They pack their climbing bags, crucially, leaving them mostly empty to make room for the massive haul they expect, and start the grueling trek.
What's the terrain like to get there?
We are talking about a 16-mile hike through freezing, icy rivers, trekking up steep gradients into the snow-covered backcountry. Some of these guys are wearing nothing but worn-out tennis shoes and thin cotton clothing.
The physical peril of that journey is immense.
Good.
I want you to explain how they actually retrieved this cargo. Because earlier, we established that heavily armed, well-supplied federal rangers struggled to extract the stuff using gas-powered chainsaws and military helicopters. How exactly are a group of starving, penniless rock climbers extracting submerged, frozen bales of weed from a lake without heavy machinery?
They accomplish it using absolute caveman technology and sheer willpower. Take the story of Chuck Strader, a 17-year-old kid who had just arrived in Yosemite with dreams of climbing El Capitan.
Just a kid.
He and his friends hike up to the lake. The shore is littered with discarded sleeping bags and clothes from previous climbers who had dumped their vital survival gear just to carry more weight in weed back down.
They were ditching everything.
They find sticks, tent poles, and an abandoned wood chopping axe. Strader and his buddies walk out onto the 3-foot-thick ice and simply start hacking at it with the axe. It is brutal, bone-jarring labor. As they chop, freezing water splashes back up into their faces and soaks their thin clothes. Their hands are stinging, raw, and completely numb.
The risk of severe hypothermia here is astronomical. They're covered in freezing water, miles from any heat source, expending massive amounts of caloric energy hacking at ice.
They finally manage to break a jagged hole through the ice. Strader goes back to the shore, scavenges a piece of broken aluminum fuel line from the severed wing, and forcefully bends it into an L shape.
Like a makeshift hook.
He walks back out to the hole, plunges his bare arm deep into the freezing, oil-slicked water, and probes the dark abyss under the ice. He hooks something heavy. It's so buoyant and waterlogged he can barely lift it, but his friends help him.
And they get it out.
They yank it up, and it slides onto the ice like a massive wet seal. It's a burlap sack, tightly sewn at the top, with a marijuana leaf famously stenciled on the side.
The ingenuity is staggering, but the desperation driving it is even more profound. You mentioned earlier that some climbers brought up their own tools. Did anyone bring anything heavier than an abandoned axe to speed up the process?
Oh, absolutely. While Strader is pulling his sack out, another climber shows up on the ice carrying a massive heavy iron contractor's breaker bar that he had stolen from a construction site down in the valley.
That sounds dangerous on ice.
He is incredibly eager and starts stabbing the ice furiously with this heavy iron rod. He finally punches through the crust, but the downward momentum is so strong and the iron bar is so dense, it rips right through his freezing, numb hands.
Oh, no.
It instantly sinks to the pitch-black bottom of the lake, leaving nothing but a tiny, useless pinprick hole in the ice.
So much for that.
Right. Eventually, the more organized climbers start hiking in their own gas-powered chainsaws, taking turns cutting massive blocks out of the ice to get direct access to the submerged cabin below.
It evolves into a fully industrialized, illicit mining operation run entirely by climbing dirtbags, but we need to discuss the actual product they are risking their lives for. The weed they are hauling out has been sitting in a stagnant cocktail of freezing lake water, leaked hydraulic fluid, and 100-octane aviation fuel for months. The toxicity of that mixture is alarming. Did people actually smoke this heavily contaminated material?
Not only did they smoke it, it became a legendary, highly sought-after sub-brand on the West Coast black market. They called it Lodestar Lightning, a nod to the Lockheed origins of the plane, or simply crash buds.
Incredible.
Because the cartel bales were tightly wrapped in multiple internal layers of plastic, the deep core of the weed was somewhat protected from the water, but it was still deeply impregnated with the pungent smell and chemical residue of jet fuel.
The chemical combustion of smoking aviation fuel cannot be overstated. Aviation gasoline, especially from that era, contains complex hydrocarbons and lead additives. When you ignite that and inhale it, you are drawing aerosolized toxins directly into your lungs.
And the sensory experience of smoking it was incredibly violent. Users from that era reported that when you lit a joint of Lodestar Lightning, it wouldn't just burn. It would literally spark, pop, and crackle like a miniature firework.
Like smoking a sparkler.
It burned so aggressively hot that it frequently singed the eyelashes and eyebrows right off the users' faces. But remember, this was incredibly potent sinsemilla, and the climbers simply didn't care about the risk.
They had a golden ticket.
They hauled these soaking wet bales back to civilization. They dried the weed out on cheap motel floors under blazing heat lamps, or they drove it down and laid it out on the hot desert rocks near Palm Springs, and then they sold it.
And this is where the underlying economics of the story shift the entire paradigm of the climbing world. Let's quantify this. What kind of capital injection into this impoverished community are we talking about here?
The sudden wealth is staggering to comprehend. Climbers were making $20,000 to $50,000 a haul.
In 1977 dollars.
Exactly. To put that purchasing power into perspective, adjusted for inflation, that is the equivalent of roughly $125,000 to over $300,000 today, in crisp, untraceable cash, for a single, strenuous hike.
Think about the psychological impact of that. For a group of people who were literally diving in dumpsters for half-eaten tourist sandwiches just weeks prior, a six-figure, tax-free cash injection is profoundly life-altering. How does this massive influx of illegal capital specifically impact the sport of American rock climbing?
It completely and fundamentally funds the professionalization of the sport. The starving dirtbags of Camp 4 suddenly possess vast financial resources. They go from wearing rags held together by tape to buying reliable used cars, VW vans, and outfitting themselves with pristine, top-of-the-line racks of climbing gear, expensive pittons, hexes, and ropes.
They don't have to worry about surviving anymore.
Because they no longer have to worry about scavenging for their next meal, they start pushing the absolute boundaries of human athletics. The athletic ceiling of the sport is violently shattered.
I want to make sure you understand what that athletic leap means. You mentioned earlier that they push grades from 5.7 to 5.13. For a non-climber, those numbers might sound arbitrary. The Yosemite decimal system grades the physical difficulty of a climb. Moving from a 5.10 to a 5.13 is not just an incremental step up, it is an evolutionary leap in human grip strength, tendon resilience, and technique.
It's exponential.
It requires holding on to micro edges and overhanging rock that defy gravity. You cannot physically train for a 5.13 if you are operating on a severe caloric deficit. The weed money bought them the calories and the uninterrupted time to train their bodies to an elite world-class standard.
Exactly. Sorry, I mean, that is the pivotal detail. They effectively granted themselves athletic stipends, and the money allowed them to expand their vision globally.
Where'd they go?
They bought commercial flights to the high Himalayas and to the challenging crags of France, exporting the aggressive Yosemite big wall ethic to the international stage. John Bachar, the legendary free solo climber, allegedly used his Dope Lake cash to help fund a highly successful climbing gear company.
It became seed money.
Vern Clevenger bought a professional Nikon camera system with his weed money and launched an acclaimed lifelong career as a high-end nature photographer.
The legacy of this cartel money is deeply embedded in the foundation of the modern outdoor industry. But this brings up a persistent rumor I hear constantly in outdoor circles. There is a deeply entrenched piece of folklore that this cartel drug money provided the initial seed capital for the massive outdoor apparel brand, Patagonia. Does the historical record support that?
Based on the historical sources and records, we can definitively debunk the Yvon Chouinard and Patagonia myth.
Good to clear that up.
Patagonia was already being legally established, and Chouinard was already a legitimate, highly successful businessman making climbing hardware well before the plane crashed. But analyzing why the community desperately wanted to believe that myth is fascinating.
It perfectly fits the Robin Hood narrative.
It really does. This deeply romantic idea that a massive anti-establishment corporate empire was secretly built on the ashes of a cartel plane crash. The reality is that the money-funded individuals, boutique gear companies, and artists, but it did not build Patagonia.
It is a brilliant sociological phenomenon. The climbing community desperately wants to legitimize their countercultural rebellion by tying it to a universally successful brand. But let's return to the timeline. As spring approaches and the snow begins to melt, this secret cannot possibly be contained. You have a bunch of formerly impoverished climbers suddenly throwing around wads of $100 bills in the local diners. The park rangers have to notice this drastic shift in behavior.
The shift is glaringly obvious to everyone in the valley. The local waitresses know, the road maintenance crews know, and Tim Setnica, the head of search and rescue, starts hearing the unavoidable rumors. By Easter weekend, the word has spread far beyond the protective bubble of the park.
It's out in the world.
It hits the gritty streets of Fresno, San Jose, and Berkeley. And suddenly, the demographic of the looters of the lake changes. It is no longer just the tight-knit, athletic climbing tribe. Hardcore, heavily armed drug dealers from the Central Valley start arriving in convoys of VW buses. The atmosphere at the lake becomes incredibly tense and territorial.
When you introduce professional, violent criminals to an amateur gold rush, escalation is inevitable. The naive innocence of the climbers is colliding with the brutal reality of the narcotics trade.
There is a terrifying standoff out on the ice that perfectly illustrates this. A Central Valley drug dealer tried to forcefully steal a climber's freshly extracted stash. The climber, described in the sources as a real hard-ass, revs up a running gas chainsaw and holds the spinning, jagged blade 3 inches from the dealer's neck.
Oh my God.
He's screaming over the engine noise, "I'm gonna mess with you, don't come any closer!"
A literal chainsaw fight on a frozen lake over cartel marijuana. The situation has completely and utterly spiraled out of the National Park Service's control. How does the federal government respond to this absolute humiliation on their own land?
They respond with overwhelming, highly publicized force. On April 13, 1977, the NPS realizes they've been made complete fools of. They launch a coordinated assault that becomes known in local lore as Big Wednesday.
Big Wednesday.
6 heavily armed, tactically geared rangers board a Huey helicopter and storm Lower Merced Pass Lake from the sky, dropping in like a military air assault.
I want you to picture the scene on the ground when that chopper arrives. What does the lake look like from the air?
It is entirely surreal. The serene alpine lake has been violently transformed into what Ranger Setnica describes as a Viet Cong-style encampment.
Just completely taken over.
The salvagers have built makeshift housing out of branches, dug out deep fire pits into the snow, strung up massive blue tarps, and hauled heavy digging equipment and fuel cans deep into the wilderness. It looks like a militant, unregulated mining camp.
And then the chopper flares.
As the massive Huey flares over the lake, the rotor downwash blasting the trees and kicking up a blinding snowstorm, the looters scatter into the dense forest like ants, abandoning their gear, their weed, and their camps.
So they mount this massive, highly coordinated military air assault. The Rangers are securing the perimeter with weapons drawn. They have the element of surprise. What is the ultimate judicial result of this raid? How many of these looters do they actually manage to arrest and prosecute?
This is the grand absurdity of the entire aftermath. Out of all the dozens of people up there, the scattering looters use their elite climbing speed to vanish into the terrain. The Rangers managed to catch exactly 2 people, Vern Clevenger and 1 other companion.
2 people out of dozens.
And it gets exponentially worse for the government. They issue Clevenger a citation and tell him to report to the federal magistrate the next day. But a federal judge ultimately reviews the case and completely nullifies the arrest due to a procedural due process violation.
Let's clarify the mechanics of that legal failure. The Rangers likely executed a warrantless search or committed a jurisdictional overreach in their desperation to make an arrest. The result is staggering. So after weeks of brazen looting, millions of dollars in stolen federal evidence, and a military-style helicopter raid, there are 0 convictions.
0. Not a single person is ever convicted or sees the inside of a jail cell for their involvement in the Dope Lake Gold Rush. The National Park Service is utterly humiliated on a national level.
So what's their next move?
To desperately prevent anyone else from accessing the lake as the ice finally thaws, they are forced to leave 2 military veteran rangers stationed in a small tent on the muddy shore for 17 straight days.
Just babysitting the lake.
These guys are living in absolute misery in the freezing mud, guarding a thawing lake, with tripwires rigged to empty tin ration cans surrounding their camp to warn them of approaching looters. They sleep with their boots on and their pug-nosed .38 caliber pistols drawn and ready.
The paradigm shift here is profound. Historically, park rangers focus heavily on conservation, helping lost hikers, leading interpretive nature walks, and managing local wildlife. Now, because of this single plane crash, they are allowing tripwires and holding tactical armed perimeters against narcotics looters in the backcountry.
And this specific, highly publicized embarrassment officially births the era of the Danger Rangers. The MPS leadership realizes they desperately need heavily armed, tactically trained law enforcement officers to maintain order.
It was the end of an era.
This event permanently ends the freewheeling, unregulated hippie era of the national parks. The federal government effectively militarizes park policing in a direct, escalating response to the actions of the Camp 4 climbers.
The narrative takes a very sharp, unsettling turn right here. The initial euphoric high of the gold rush, the sudden influx of wealth, the anti-establishment rebellion, it all seems to crash into a much darker, paranoid reality as the spring progresses.
It does. I want to drop the tempo here because the wild Robin Hood joyride of Dope Lake takes a deeply paranoid turn in May. The psychological safety of the climbing tribe is about to permanently fracture.
What happened?
On May 23, 1977, there is a rescue mission on Yosemite Point Buttress that has nothing directly to do with the plane crash. 2 climbers, Larry Day and Donald Evans, are attempting a climb they are woefully unprepared for. They are highly inexperienced, and they are literally wearing cotton t-shirts and turtlenecks on a massive granite wall.
Any experienced mountaineer will tell you the first unbreakable rule of the backcountry is cotton kills. We need to explain the physics of that phrase.
So important.
Wool or modern synthetics trap warm air and retain their insulating properties even when soaking wet. Cotton does the exact opposite. Once cotton gets wet from rain or sweat, it loses all its loft and insulation. Through evaporative cooling, it actively and aggressively draws vital body heat away from your core. Wearing cotton in an alpine storm is a recipe for rapid, fatal hypothermia.
And that is exactly what happens. It begins to rain heavily, they get trapped on the wall, their rope jams, and they become severely hypothermic. Unable to move, they call for help. A YOSAR rescue team is quickly dispatched at 3:30 in the morning to save them in the pitch dark.
And who was on that team?
Among the elite rescuers is John Jack Dorn. Jack is 30 years old. He is a beloved, highly experienced rescuer from Camp 4. He has hiked the treacherous Yosemite Falls Trail countless times in his life.
So he knows it well.
But in the dark, during the intense pressure of this rescue, Jack Dorn steps off the established trail and slides 400 to 600 feet down a steep, slick granite slab to his death.
A highly experienced rescuer, on a trail he knows entirely by heart, just steps off the edge and falls hundreds of feet in the dark. Given the extreme tension in the park, the millions in cartel money floating around, and the heavily armed rangers, that sounds incredibly suspicious to a community already on edge.
And that exact suspicion instantly consumed the residents of Camp 4. The sudden, tragic death of Jack Dorn ignited a wildfire of dark, labyrinthine conspiracy theories.
I can only imagine.
The climbers were already operating in a state of high anxiety, holding tens of thousands of dollars of illegal drug money in their tents. Whispers started circulating rapidly that Dorn didn't just slip on wet rock. Rumors claimed he was murdered by cartel hitmen who had quietly infiltrated the park.
Were there specific narratives or motives attached to these theories? Why would a Mexican cartel target Jack Dorn specifically during a routine rescue operation?
The mythology got incredibly specific and complex. One prominent rumor claimed that a black book, a highly sensitive smuggler's ledger detailing the syndicate's operational contacts, flight routes, and money drops, had been recovered from the cockpit of the Howard 500 by a climber, and that Dorn knew entirely too much about who possessed it.
Like a spy thriller.
Another wild theory alleged that one of the elite stone masters had escaped the Big Wednesday helicopter raid, not with weed, but with a hidden kilo of pure cocaine from the plane, and that Dorn's death was a brutal, retaliatory strike by the syndicate to send a terrifying message to the climbers.
When a small, isolated community is suddenly flooded with immense illicit wealth, paranoia is the natural, inevitable byproduct. You stop trusting your neighbors, you stop trusting your environment. Every shadow becomes a threat. But is there any forensic or historical evidence to support these elaborate assassination theories?
None at all. The forensic and historical reality is deeply tragic, but highly straightforward. It was a devastating mountaineering accident. It was pitch dark, it was raining heavily, the granite rock was incredibly slick, and a seasoned professional made a single fatal misstep.
Just a terrible accident.
But analyzing why those conspiracy theories took such a deep hold is crucial to understanding the impact of Dope Lake. The sudden influx of cartel wealth had completely destroyed the psychological safety of the tribe. The innocence of the dumpster-diving dirtbags was gone forever. They were now operating in the dark shadow of international drug trafficking, and every rustling branch looked like a hitman.
The psychological toll of that transition must have been immense. They traded their carefree innocence for massive capital, and they paid for it with their peace of mind.
Which brings us to the final closure of the crash site. Fast forward to June 16, 1977. The ice finally, completely melts from the surface of Lower Merced Pass Lake. A local heavy salvage company from the valley is brought in.
To finally pull it up.
They use cables and winches to pull the twisted, torn fuselage of the Howard 500 up toward the surface. As they manipulate the gnarled wreckage, the body of the passenger, Jeff Nelson, floats up to the surface.
And what about the pilot, John Glisky?
Ranger Butch Farabee, who is serving as the lead diver, plunges into the murky, fuel-stained water to physically cut Glisky free from the wreckage. He finds him strapped securely upside down in his seat, his hair dancing weightlessly in the water currents.
Just like the dream.
Looking exactly as his wife Pam had seen in her terrifying dream months earlier in Las Vegas.
The confirmation of that premonition is deeply chilling. How does Pam handle the agonizing reality of the recovery?
Her reaction is a heartbreaking study in human psychology. Following her mother's protective advice, Pam adamantly refuses to visually identify the body. She doesn't want the permanent trauma of seeing him in that state.
Which is completely understandable.
And psychologically, she uses this lack of visual confirmation as a shield to hold on to the impossible, desperate hope that he somehow survived the crash. For nearly 30 years, she convinces herself that he escaped the wreckage, evaded the authorities, and is living happily under an assumed name on a warm beach in Cancun.
30 years of sustained denial. That is an incredibly powerful defense mechanism against profound grief. What finally breaks that wall of denial?
In the mid-2000s, a high school friend of hers, named Rick Schloss, begins deeply investigating the crash for a historical book. He reaches out to Pam and gently tells her he's obtained an evidentiary photograph taken by authorities during the salvage operation, clearly showing John's body. He asks if she's finally ready to see it.
And she agrees.
She says yes. She looks the photograph, And 30 years of complex denial collapses in an instant. She finally breaks down and gets the closure she had avoided for decades. But surprisingly, when Schloss tells her about the incredible aftermath about the Camp 4 climbers, the massive gold rush, and the specialized gear they bought with John's doomed cargo, Pam actually laughs.
Really? She laughed.
She looked at him and said, "The climbers got a chance to push the limits of their sport. John would have loved that."
That is a remarkable bit of grace to find in the wreckage of your own life. And her reaction brilliantly highlights the central, inescapable paradox of this entire event.
It is a haunting contradiction to mull over as we close this deep dive.
Yeah.
I want you to think about the lasting legacy of Dope Lake, the very act of the federal government trying to aggressively secure and erase this plane crash from the wilderness fundamentally transformed them.
It created the danger rangers.
It birthed the militarized, tactically trained, heavily policed, modern national park system we see today.
But on the exact opposite side of the ledger, the illicit cartel money scavenged from that freezing toxic water bought the financial freedom, the uninterrupted time, and the pristine gear that allowed a generation of starving dirtbags to elevate rock climbing from a fringe, impoverished hobby into a highly specialized, globally recognized professional sport.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The absolute purity of modern free climbing, the incredible athletic brilliance we revere on those massive granite walls in Yosemite today was, quite literally, funded by aviation fuel-soaked marijuana pulled from a freezing alpine lake.
It's an unbelievable origin story.
It leaves you wondering, the next time you visit a national park and you see a climber perfectly executing a gravity-defying route, or you see a ranger with a tactical vest patrolling the backcountry, you have to ask yourself, how much of our modern outdoor world was secretly built by the ghosts in that pitch-black cockpit?
Thank you for joining us on this adventure. Until next time, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it and keep seeking the extraordinary.